I'm telling you, the world has gone absolutely sideways when a man can't even fix a gate on his own dirt without someone treating it like a declaration of international war. I was barely tightening the last bolt on the new security gate, just minding my own business, when I heard that unmistakable screech, tires spinning way too fast on loose gravel. I looked up, and there she was, a beat-up white SUV barreling toward me, kicking up a dust cloud like a desert sandstorm, and out jumps Karen. She was decked out in hiking boots, neon leggings, and a fanny pack that looked like it was tactically armed for a siege. She charged toward the gate, red-faced and huffing like I'd just committed a war crime. And before I could even get a hello out, she whipped out her phone, pointed it at me with hands shaking from pure adrenaline, and barked, "You're being recorded. You're illegally blocking a historic trail." Her voice actually cracked halfway through, which made the whole thing sound even more ridiculous than it already was. I just stood there in my work boots, holding a wrench, trying my hardest not to laugh as she started shrieking in her phone. 911? Yes, I'd like to report a man for hostage-taking. He's trapping citizens on a public trail. It would have been funny if it wasn't so detached from reality. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies were racing down the road, lights flashing, sirens wailing, while Karen waved them in like she was directing fighter jets onto an aircraft carrier. I knew right then, this wasn't going to be your average Saturday. The deputies barely had their seat belts unbuckled before she sprinted toward the cruiser, flailing her arms like one of those inflatable tube men at a car dealership. "He's blocking access to the historical trail," she screamed, jabbing a finger in my perfectly legal, freshly installed gate. She started spinning this wild story about people being stuck back there without food or water, calling me a monster with enough drama to win an Oscar. I didn't say a word. I just wiped my hands on an old rag and pointed to the 6 massive private property signs bolted to every single fence post. The older deputy gave me a long, tired look, then turned back to her and asked, "Ma'am, can you show us exactly which public trail you're talking about?" Karen puffed up like a toad and stomped right up to the gate. In a move that looked like it was ripped straight from a bad slapstick comedy, she grabbed the locked gate, tried to yank it open with all her might, slipped, and tumbled backward into the dirt, losing a sandal in the process. For a second, the whole world just froze. Then, as she struggled to untangle herself from a thistly bush, the younger deputy had to cough into his hand to hide a laugh. But Karen? She wasn't deterred. She scrambled up, 1 foot bare, and launched into this high-speed rant about how the land belonged to the people because her great-uncle's friend's cousin's roommate supposedly rode a horse through here back in the 60s. I just blinked, trying to follow the mental gymnastics. I reached into my truck, pulled out a thick folder, and handed the deputies the deed, the city land records, and a fresh surveyor's report, certified, notarized, and laminated, because I've lived here long enough to know you never underestimate a local troublemaker. The deputies spent maybe 5 minutes flipping through the papers before telling her, "Ma'am, this is private land. This isn't, and has never been, a public trail. You need to leave." You could practically see the steam coming out of her ears. Her face turned a shade of purple I thought only existed in cartoons, and she started screeching about having their jobs and being friends with the mayor. The older deputy just said dryly, "That's great, ma'am, but unless the mayor can rewrite property laws, you're trespassing." She stomped off toward her SUV, still shoeless on 1 foot, slammed the door so hard it echoed across the valley, and sped away in a cloud of dust, leaving 1 very sad sandal behind. I had a sinking feeling, though. People like her don't back down. They double down. Sure enough, by Monday, neon-colored flyers were duct-taped to every mailbox and gas station bulletin board in town. They had a badly photoshopped picture of me looking like a cartoon villain, claiming I was destroying community heritage. It was absurd, but she was dead serious. That afternoon, I heard shouting at the back of my property. I walked down and found Karen with about a dozen followers, a mix of retirees who hadn't hiked in a decade, and some teenagers who were just there for the chaos. They'd tied balloons to my fence and set up a folding table with a petition. Karen spotted me and pointed like she'd found a war criminal. There he is. I just leaned against the post and watched. She started rambling about common law access, using made-up legal terms that sounded fancy but meant absolutely nothing. I decided it was time to end the games. I showed her an email from my lawyer, a cease and desist for using unauthorized drone photos of my land in her flyers and for defamation. I told her she had 24 hours to take them all down or face a lawsuit that would bury her so deep she'd need a trail map to find her way out. The crowd started to murmur. The reasonable ones quietly packed their signs and slipped away, pretending they didn't even know her. Karen went into full meltdown, screaming about the Supreme Court, but I just whistled a tune and walked back to the house. I thought that might be the breaking point, but a few nights later, my security system buzzed. I checked the live feed, and there she was again, creeping around the back gate with 2 die-hard loyalists and a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. I leaned back in my chair, cracked a soda, and watched the show. She positioned herself like a movie villain about to cut the red wire on a bomb. But my gate wasn't just chained, it was rigged. The second those cutters bit into the metal, the motion sensors tripped. Floodlights snapped on like a football stadium. Alarms started screaming, and a firm, robotic voice blared over the speakers announcing that law enforcement was on the way. Karen shrieked and dropped the cutters like they'd bitten her. One of her buddies tried to bolt, but landed face first in a patch of thistles. I watched the red and blue lights appear in the distance, sipping my drink in the dark. The deputies arrived, and Karen started babbling about historical emergencies, but they weren't buying it. They cuffed her while she quoted random constitutional amendments completely out of context. By morning, the town was buzzing. The hashtag #TrailFail was everywhere. People were making memes of her dressed like Indiana Jones, swinging wire cutters over a pit of legal documents. I let the story grow legs on its own while I prepared the paperwork for property damage and a permanent restraining order. When the court date finally came, I showed up in a clean shirt, calm and prepared. Karen showed up 15 minutes late, wearing hiking boots caked in mud and a giant Justice for Trails button. She walked in with the energy of someone about to give the speech of a lifetime, but she had no documents, just blurry cell phone photos and a lot of feelings. My attorney, on the other hand, laid out a wall of evidence: deeds, surveys, permits, and that beautiful high-def security footage of her cutting the chain. The judge, a woman whose patience was thinner than paper, was not impressed. When Karen couldn't produce a single shred of proof that the trail was public, the gavel came down. Hard. She was fined for trespassing, ordered to pay for the gate, and hit with a permanent restraining order. The judge even warned her about civil suits for the drone photos. Karen's face just crumbled. She stood there frozen, fists clenched, while her last few supporters shuffled out without a word. Outside the courthouse, she tried to give one last press conference to a few board reporters, ranting about corruption with tears streaking down her face. It was pathetic. The local news ran the story with the headline, "Gatekeeper wins legal battle. Trail claims proven false." They didn't even edit out her shouting at the sky. Within days, she was kicked out of the local historical society, and her online followers vanished. Now life is quiet again. I upgraded the security even more, not because I have to, but because it feels good to know things are locked down. My neighbor stopped by the other day, laughing, and told me I was a local legend for taking on the Karen and coming out clean. It wasn't just about the land, though. It was about drawing a line in the sand against that kind of entitlement. I'm sitting on my porch now, watching the sunset over a trail that is quiet, peaceful, and legally mine. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How far would someone have to go before they realized they were the villain in their own story? Or is that the problem? That people like her always think they're the hero, no matter how many fences they have to cut down? Anyway, that's my story. If you've ever had to deal with a neighbor who thought your backyard was their playground, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Or if you think I should have just let her have her historic horse trail fantasy. Stay safe out there, and keep your gates locked.